Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's call. We have a very large call with likely over 1,400 people registered for the call. So I'm going to give it at least another minute or two to allow time for more people to join before we get started. Thanks for your patience. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's call. We have a very large call today. Over 600 people are already on. Many more are joining. We have over 1,400 people registered. So I'm going to give it another probably 1 to 2 minutes to allow more people to join before we get started. Thanks for your patience. Hi, thanks for joining today's call. I'm going to give it 1 more minute before we get started. We have such a large call today. We have about 750 people on already and are expecting many more to join. So I just want to allow more people to join before we start the agenda. Thanks. Okay, hi everybody. This is Diane Yantel. I'm President and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Thanks for joining today's call on coronavirus, housing, disasters, housing, and homelessness. I appreciate everybody's joining. We have a very large call today. We have over 820 people on already, many more joining. We have over 1,400 people registered for the call today. And I appreciate everybody taking the time to join, especially during and after another incredibly difficult week for our country, from armed insurrection at the Capitol and a president and his enablers who incited it to surging COVID-19 throughout the country once again. And we have a tremendous amount of work to do to continue ensuring that COVID-19 and its financial fallout doesn't further harm the lowest income and most marginalized people in our country. And so to that end, we have a lot to discuss today. And first, I'm just so pleased to welcome back to our call Senator Sherrod Brown, who I can now introduce as the incoming chairman of the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. And we are all certainly thrilled to see him in that role and look forward to working with him on comprehensive solutions to the COVID eviction crisis and to the longstanding and underlying affordable housing crisis. And as everybody on this call knows well, Senator Brown is a champion for these issues, and his leadership was instrumental to having Congress extend the eviction moratorium, and provide $25 billion in emergency rental assistance. So we're so looking forward to his continued and strengthened leadership in the Senate. So Senator Brown, welcome back to the call, and thank you so much for your tremendous dedication to the housing needs of the lowest income people. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Diane, thank you, and the same to you. You all know in this call the leadership that Diane Yuntel has shown, and it was I've known it for years. I've seen her at our committee. Can't count the number of times, and always good insight, always passionate in her advocacy, but dispassionate in terms of facts and bringing and persuasion of committee members. But I really saw it this December when we had tried to get the $25 billion in emergency rental assistance, and she did such a good job of organizing and pushing and cajoling and all the things and organizing so many of you to put pressure on Republicans and on Mitch McConnell to finally do this. And you all know that, the moratorium's important. The dollars are important. You all know the tidal wave of evictions that could happen and will happen unless Congress had done that in December, but now continues to do that in the next package. And Diane's been so key, and because she understands housing so well from her work in Massachusetts and here now nationally, how important it is that this be carried out in the right way, that the moratorium continues, and that the money gets out in ways that keep people from being evicted in the middle of the winter, in the middle of the pandemic. So thank you all on behalf of all families all over the country. Thanks for the work that all 800 of you, I think that's the number I heard her on this call. Let me talk for a moment, as Diane did, about this week. We were in session in the Senate. None of us, I can't speak for everybody, but I don't think we felt our lives in danger, and House members did, because it was clear, the more we know, that this was a professional, organized militia. These were people that many of them had trained. There were some hangers-on that were along perhaps for the ride, but many of them had, but you also, of course, know if this had been a Black Lives Matter rally, the number of deaths would have been multiples of 5 that were actually killed in this rally, but in this riot. But if it had been a Black Lives Matter rally, the number of deaths would have been many-fold of this, and the number of arrests would have been hundreds, not a dozen. And we all know that. And I think America learned something, because much of white America didn't quite understand that so well until they saw the picture after this happened, the picture of the very well-equipped, well-protected police officers standing with their shields and their guns or their batons with helmets, standing at the Lincoln Memorial, protecting only the statue of a guy in marble, Abraham Lincoln, versus what happened at the Capitol when hundreds of staff people, from custodians to secretaries to assistants to senators and House members, were. So I called last week on the vice president to invoke the 25th Amendment. He likely won't do that. I have said we should look at impeachment. I've said that Hawley and Cruz should resign, or we should consider expulsion. We also know that it wasn't just the ringleaders like Cruz and Hawley. It was a whole party of senators and House members who continued to say that there was fraud in this election and are unwilling to call this president out. And then he obviously incited this riot. So, but all of this, the darkest time, one of the worst days in our nation's history. But what gives me hope today is the resiliency of the people in this country. We saw it in Georgia last Tuesday, the first African American and the first Jew elected to the United States Senate from that state. That state's voters. My mother grew up in Georgia. My mom. I'm old enough to remember not the Supreme Court decision, Brown v. Board of Education, but the aftermath of when we did busing around the country for integration. I remember my mom said to me one day, she said, I remember busing, and she grew up in a town of 500 in Georgia. So I remember busing. It was when Black kids were bused in old rickety buses past the nice white schoolhouse to the inferior Black school building. And that was what busing was in those days in the South. And so I think of the Dr. King quote when he was reading from the letter to Birmingham jail, when he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail to the quote unquote moderate ministers that were admonishing him to go slow and be cautious and we'll get there. And King wrote the line, progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. Progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. And only he could have written it so beautifully. It rolls in because we make it so. It's what you do on this call. It's what all of you as activists, Diane, and all of you do is you advocate for housing justice. It's what you did last year when the House first passed the emergency rental assistance bill that Chairwoman Maxine Waters from California, who's my counterpart in the House, when we introduced that bill back in May. For half a year, McConnell blocked it. You kept pushing. Your advocacy allowed us to secure that $25 billion finally in December, and to get the extension of the CDC's national eviction moratorium in that December package. It's not everything we need, of course. It's a critical first step. It will help prevent that wave of evictions that was inevitable if Congress hadn't acted. It will help deal with housing instability. It will help those families that just, even though they got the moratorium and just every month one more rent payment they owed, it's a burden they can never pay off without some federal help. So with the results in Georgia, we have an opportunity to make real progress on housing. In the name of the committee that I will chair is referred colloquially as it's around the Capitol and to many around the country as the Senate Banking Committee. I always refer to it as the Banking Housing Committee because its real name is Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. And the word housing the rest of my career, however long that is, I represent a state that's, to say, not an easy state for a progressive like me to win. But I will devote the rest of my career to housing. It's the most important thing, what you are fighting for every day, safe, affordable, accessible housing to people. There's nothing more important. It affects, you all know this, it affects life expectancy. It affects children's opportunity. It affects education. It affects safe drinking water. It affects nutritious foods, access to nutritious foods. It affects everything, good housing. And you know this number, a quarter of people who rent in this country pre-pandemic, a quarter of people who rent spend 50% or more of their income in housing and utilities. And one thing goes wrong in their life, their car breaks down, their child gets sick, they get hurt in the workplace and have to take a week off of work, and everything can go upside down for them. So the pandemic, in a curious way, tragic and curious ways, taught us what you've known for years, and that is how safe, stable housing is essential to our well-being. I will, as the chair of this committee, have a strong partner in Marcia Fudge as incoming HUD secretary. I am sitting right now in Congresswoman Marcia Fudge's district. It's where I live. My zip code, the zip code where Connie and I live, back in 2007, it had more foreclosures than any zip code in the United States. I still see the remnants of that. How hard it is for a community to fight back. So we will have two Clevelanders leading on housing issues. We'll start by working with the Biden administration to quickly get out the emergency rental assistance that we passed, and we'll extend the eviction protections as we get people the help they need. We're going to begin work immediately on a new COVID relief package that'll help us get this pandemic under control. It'll put money in people's pockets. I mean, think about, I was just talking to the CEO of a major bank, and he was marveling at, he's not an ally on a number of issues with me, but he was marveling at what Congress did back in March. I mean, when we passed that first COVID package, a study 4 months later, a study showed that 13 million people were kept out of poverty because we did what we should have done on housing, and it wasn't quite enough, to be sure, and it certainly hasn't been enough since. But for unemployed workers, for small businesses, for housing, for local governments, we did things that really, really mattered. So we need to get to work to address the underlying affordable housing crisis and inequality. This is about income inequality. It's about wealth inequality. It's about structural racism. And that's everything this committee does on housing, everything this committee does, period, will be through the prism of what does this do about racial inequality, structural racism? What does this do about wealth inequality? How do these actions, we're going to look at legislation and work in this committee and hearings through the eyes of workers, not through the eyes of Wall Street, but through the eyes of everybody else in the society who's been left behind. We'll work especially to preserve and create affordable housing, to prevent and end homelessness. Bill Faith, my longtime Ohio friend and partner, has done such impressive things with Co-Ohio. We always look to him for leadership. We need to invest in low-income neighborhoods, communities of color that have suffered from disinvestment. This committee will play a role in combating climate change and advancing environmental justice through energy efficient, healthy housing, and on the transportation side, which this committee works on too, on public transit, on more energy efficient public transportation, and always addressing racial and ethnic disparities in our housing and communities. And that means strengthening fair housing protections that have been under assault during the Trump administration. The HUD, as you know, has been on the wrong side of history on all these issues. I mean, it started with the black codes, then it was Jim Crow, then it was redlining, and then it was the Trump administration locking in these discriminatory practices. Those we will wipe away. We can't wipe away the history of Jim Crow and the history of the black codes and Jim Crow and redlining, but we can dismantle it and we can move forward. So I will stop right there. If Diane wants a question or two, I'm willing to take a couple more minutes if people want to. And thank you so much, all of you, for continued advocacy on behalf of your neighbors and our communities all over the country. So if Diane wants to do questions, I'm certainly willing.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Senator Brown. I couldn't agree more with everything you said. And speaking of Bill Faith, he put a comment in the chat box to say, "You are just awesome, my friend. We are with you in this fight, Mr. Chairman." And if you have a chance, I hope you'll take a look at many comments in the chat box and in the Q&A. Many people who are on this line, we have over 1,000 people on the line now, many of them expressing their thanks to you for your leadership and your commitment and your work. So I hope you'll get a chance to take a look at that. But I would love to hear more from you. I think all of us would, about what's next and how we prioritize the many needs for assistance for low-income renters and to end homelessness. You know, how do we kind of sequence, and what are your priorities to address first as incoming chairman of the committee?
Yeah. Thanks. The first thing is, the first thing we do, this is more procedural, but we need to quickly move on confirming nominees, Marcia Fudge, and through this committee, Marcia Fudge and Cecilia Rouse. Marcia Fudge, I said, is my congresswoman. So Cecilia Rouse is interestingly, the daughter-in-law of Toni Morrison, the great writer from Lorain, Ohio. And she is a professor at Princeton, and she is the new chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. She will be in the room on all economic decisions. Essentially, that's what that job does, and that's so important. So we will move on confirmations. We've got to decide what we do with impeachment. I'm concerned that impeachment gets in the way, if you will. I know that maybe I should have waded into this, but gets in the way of the things we need to do, only because all work stops during an impeachment trial. It doesn't mean we don't work. We're not working on the side, making sure that we're moving on this other legislation. But the COVID relief package, to me, is the most important thing we do. As much as I think Trump deserves impeachment, as much as I think he deserves to be convicted, as much as I think Giuliani and Eric Trump, or whichever Trump it was that was exhorting people to violence, as much as I think a number of those people that assaulted police officers and broke windows and surged into the Capitol and called the black police officers names, those people deserve to be held accountable, and that means prison sentences when they earned it, if you will. I want to really use this committee to focus on what we do on making sure there's enough money for eviction assistance, and I will consult with Diane and Bill and others on that this money gets out the door and it's done right. The oversight of making sure it's done right is essential. Keeping the moratorium is essential. And I said in those comments, we've got to get help to local governments so that they don't start laying off massive numbers of people. And we know those functions they do in local government, from schools to children's services to police and fire, are essential. We've got to get the vaccine out to teachers so that students can go back to school in person. We know that our society will pay as a society, and our children will pay as individuals. If we especially can't get low-income, moderate-income kids back in the classroom, we'll never get the economy going well enough. When parents have to worry about their kids going to school or not going to school and being home, and all the problems that causes with so many working parents. So that's the beginning of this. And then when the vaccines are distributed to everyone, and we've convinced as a society enough people to take them, which is 70, 80, 90% of the people, we then will turn to what do we do long-term on housing to build more housing. And there are all kinds of ideas. Beth on this call, my staff kind of went through a litany today of discussion on how we do that. We support, when we do a big infrastructure bill, which I hope we do, that includes public transit. It includes building housing around transit stops so people can go to work safely and cheaply, and more, if I could, more energy efficiently, and by investments in the National Housing Trust Fund and public housing. I just think there are so many opportunities here, and the pent-up demand. Since Diane's worked with this committee so many years, the pent-up demand is great, and we really do think it's really these first 100 days. It's all about, this committee has been about Wall Street for far too many years. The first 100 days, people are going to see this committee is going to look out for everybody else. And I'll just end the answer with this. I want people to be able to say, in the summer of 2022, I went out and voted in 2020 and my life got better. And, whether it's the earned child tax credit, whether it's housing, whether it's the overtime rule, whether it's minimum wage, whether it's helping working class kids pay off their student loans, all of these things we need to deliver. So much of that is through the Banking Housing Committee. Much of it's through other committees. That doesn't matter to the public. They just want to feel within several months of taking over here in the Senate and in the White House that their lives got better.
Well, that sounds like a very exciting and appropriate agenda, and one we really look forward to working closely with you and your staff on. And just have to say, what I know you already know is that you have a tremendous staff, and we're really grateful to work with Beth Cooper and Jeremy and Megan and others who do tremendous work on your behalf. And we're grateful to them, and we're so grateful to you for your leadership, Senator Brown. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, they actually one correction, Diane, is Joe Biden said when he announced the Attorney General, he said, he's not my Attorney General, he's the country's Attorney General. And he said this staff works on my behalf. They really work on your behalf and the behalf of the people on this call. So I know you know that, but I just thought I'd throw that in so I could disagree with you on one little thing.
That's fair. And
well, thank you. Thanks to all of you. And just your activism is so important. And every time I've talked to you all, you've had hundreds of people on the call. And I just so appreciate there are people all over this country that even in the darkest times, the last few years, you've been out there. And that's why times are brighter now, because you've been doing that. So once we get through this inauguration and whatever these militia groups are planning on the 17th and the 20th, this country is going to go in the right direction, and you're a big part of that. So thanks, everybody, for allowing me to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Senator Brown. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. All right. See you. Thanks, Diane. See you.
Bye-bye. Okay, well, that was certainly a boost, wasn't it? That was a real shot in the arm. I know we're all incredibly grateful for Senator Brown's work and excited about what's to come with him as the chair, somebody who has such a deep understanding of the need and such a clear commitment to the solutions. So we're thrilled, and I know you all are too. And we have such a big call today. I think we're up to nearly 1,200 people who are on the line. So thank you all for joining during this time. So we're going to move now into some other components of the agenda, and wanted to start with talking about some of the latest news on the extended eviction moratorium and the emergency rental assistance that I know is very top of mind for everybody on the line. So of course, as you all know and are probably counting down the days with us, the current CDC eviction moratorium expires in 20 days. And so, of course, we need next is for President-elect Biden on his first day in office to extend and strengthen and enforce an eviction moratorium that goes through the duration of the pandemic. So we are working, you all have seen, and we've talked at length about what was in our transition memo, the paper that we put together with Eviction Lab and National Housing Law Project with some of the specifics on a strengthened eviction moratorium that needs to be part of Joe Biden's executive order that we hope him to issue on day one in office on January 20th. So we have had some conversations with his transition team, and I would say that, you know, they are aware and thinking about what next steps they will take. I do think that they are planning to, in some way, continue a moratorium for some period of time. And I think they're doing a lot of thinking and having conversations about best ways to do that. And we are certainly part of those conversations and weighing in very strongly. We have, as you all know, we also have a letter that we are circulating, a sign-on letter to President-elect Biden with the specific improvements that we want to see in the eviction moratorium that's circulating now. This is the same letter that we had over 1,500 organizations and elected officials sign on to when we sent it to the CDC and when we sent it to Congress. So we have reopened that letter and are welcoming additional signatures on it. We're going to close the letter on Friday and send it that day or over the weekend. So if you're not on the letter yet and you'd like to be, please sign it right away. Elena just put a link to it in the chat box. And also, if you have already signed it, share it with your networks, encourage others to sign too. And again, it's for organizations and for elected officials to sign on to. So we want to have as many signatures as we can, of course, when we send that to President-elect Biden and his team. We also are, of course, working hard on ensuring that the $25 billion in emergency rental assistance that we collectively were able to get Congress to appropriate, we're working hard to ensure that those funds get out quickly and to the people who need it the most, the lowest income, the most marginalized people who are most at risk of eviction. So many of you participated in the very quick turnaround process that Sarah Sadian on our team led last week, which was to get your input on guidance that we want to see the Department of Treasury issue related to how states and localities can use these funds. So first, I want to say that I think it was the day after our last call, Treasury did put out on its website an overview of the program. It really was sort of a description of what's in the statute. And they opened up the process for certification for states and localities to get in their request that they receive a direct allocation from Treasury of these funds. So that certification process ends tomorrow, January 12th. So states and localities need to pay attention to that. And if they haven't yet, make sure that they get in what needs to be submitted to Treasury by tomorrow so that they can receive a direct allocation of the emergency rental assistance funds. And again, it's states and it's cities or localities with populations over 200,000 that are eligible to get direct allocations. So since Treasury is moving pretty quickly on this and had the certification process be pretty brief, it does seem like they're going to meet that 30-day deadline that's required of them to get those funds out within 30 days of enactment. So it could be as soon as next week that those funds will be sent to states and cities. And then the question is how the states and cities and localities start to use them. So what I mentioned earlier is that, you know, we are expecting that, of course, the Department of Treasury will put out guidance on this important and large program sometime soon, and that their guidance will fill in some of the blanks that's in the legislation and give direction in areas where direction is needed or would be helpful. So Sarah led a process last week through our policy working group of this call and through our state and local implementation working group. We got a tremendous amount of feedback from many of you who are on this call. Some of you program administrators, some of you advocates, organizers, or impacted people. And it was very helpful and helped us put together a very useful to Treasury and to the transition team document with specific recommendations for guidance. I'd say overarching, our recommendations are not surprising, right? One, to get the money to the people who need it the most through increased targeting, engaging with impacted people, special outreach to marginalized communities, special considerations for survivors of domestic violence, other populations. So one, get the money to the people who need it the most, and two, simplify, simplify, simplify. So not allow additional criteria to be added on. You simplify the documentation wherever possible. That's kind of the themes. But I'm going to turn it over now to Sarah Sadian to go in a little bit more depth on the recommendations that were made to the Department of Treasury. And I see that Elena put the link to the letter in the chat box. And I would just say before Sarah gets started that we've sent it to the Treasury, the transition teams for the Department of Treasury and the Department of HUD. And we've also sent it to the career staff at both departments, as well as the broader transition team for Joe Biden. So Sarah, I'll turn it over to you to talk in more specifics about the guidance that we're requesting.
Great, thanks so much, Diane. To hit on a couple of things, I also want to give my thanks to everybody on the policy working group and the state and local implementation group for their feedback. There's a really short period of time to turn around suggestions, and everybody worked really quickly to get this done. So thank you so much. And what we gathered from input from our stakeholders on those calls, and also from the work our research team has been doing to track state and local rental assistance programs, we made it clear that we had two major goals in trying to move this guidance forward. One, we wanted to make sure that guidance addressed the challenges that states and localities had in administering rental assistance programs that were funded through the CARES Act, including CRF, and also to encourage cities and states to design their rental assistance programs in ways that use evidence-based best practices. So I want to highlight some of the specific recommendations. First, we wanted to make sure that any guidance that is put out really emphasizes state and local flexibility. We know that under the CARES Act, many folks who are administering those funds were worried that the Treasury Department would put out further guidance and they would be forced to pay back money to the Treasury if their programs weren't in compliance. So it's really incredibly important that Treasury this time around reaffirm at the outset just how much broad discretion is given to states and local governments so that they're assured in their ability to spend down the money quickly. A second area of focus for our recommendations is around prioritizing households with the greatest needs. As Diane had mentioned earlier, we know that $25 billion is a tremendous amount of money, but it's also not enough to fully address the entire scope of needs. So it's really important that Treasury make sure that these limited resources are reaching households who are most vulnerable to evictions and, in worst cases, homelessness as a result of housing instability. So in our letter, we recommend strengthening language around prioritization. The bill includes language that directs states and localities to prioritize households below 50% of area median income. And we want to make sure that Treasury is being as clear as possible about making sure that resources are set aside for those that income population. We also want to make sure that to the extent that state and local governments are setting their own priorities, that those priorities are based in what the data says are the populations with the greatest needs, and that Treasury is encouraging localities to work with community-based organizations to do the outreach that's needed to make sure that marginalized populations are getting the assistance that they need. The third major set of recommendations were around streamlining the process as much as possible by using self-certifications to avoid burdensome documentation requirements. Again, this is something we all have seen as CARES Act money has been reaching communities and rental assistance. Many states and localities have done a great job administering those funds. Other states have been challenged by overly burdensome documentation requirements. So we want to make sure that Treasury is, to the greatest extent possible, encouraging states, making it clear that states and localities should be using self-certification wherever it's possible. So in things like proving hardship, proving that you're at risk of instability or homelessness, what types of housing expenses should be covered, income determinations, all of that should be using self-certification if and when possible. In terms of financial aid, there's a lot of recommendations that we gave around making sure that renters aren't penalized when landlords refuse to participate in rental assistance programs. Again, this is a lesson we learned through our partners on the ground, where unfortunately landlords were refusing to participate in programs or were non-responsive. Many of those localities were very quick to adapt to those circumstances and provide resources directly to renters. But we want to make sure in this guidance that that process is as easy as possible under a short time frame as possible. We don't want renters to be on the hook if their landlords aren't participating. And so we recommend not only to require as short a time as possible before that can happen, but even to allow grantees to provide resources directly to renters without having to wait to see whether or not their landlords refuse to participate or not. We also want to make sure that financial assistance or rental assistance is available to all types of renters, regardless of the type of housing they live in, and regardless of whether they have a formal or informal lease agreement. We wanted to make sure also that households that are currently receiving federal housing assistance also can receive help, because we know that in many cases those households have still accumulated back rent. For housing stability services, we were really pleased to see that the bill allows for up to 10% of resources to be used in this way, but there's no definition in the statute for what housing stabilization services really means. And so we want Treasury to use HUD's definition under the Emergency Solutions Grants Program as a starting point, rather than coming up with a new definition for what kind of resources could fall under that. It's really important that they use HUD's definition for stabilization services, because that means it also would include legal services, which we know are really critical to keeping renters in their homes, especially during the pandemic. We also want them to provide clarification about administrative fees and how that interacts with stabilization services. Diane mentioned that Treasury published a website recently with information about emergency rental assistance, and they incorrectly state on the website that administrative fees would come out of the same pot of money as stabilization services. And we want that to correct that, because without any correction, it would mean that it'd be nearly impossible for states and localities to provide stabilization services. And finally, we give recommendations around data reporting. It's really important that we have full, meaningful data collection and reporting that would allow for better oversight of these programs, but it also allows advocates and others to discern best practices and areas for improvement in case emergency rental assistance is needed in the future. It also would allow us to better understand whether resources are reaching marginalized populations, including renters of color. And so it's important from a racial equity lens as well, that we are able to receive full data for analysis. So those are the major components of the letter that we wrote to Treasury, and I'll turn it back to Diane to talk about other steps on that.
Great, Sarah, thanks. That's a terrific overview. And again, I would point everybody, there have been a few questions on specifics around language and asking for Sarah to repeat something that she shared. I would point everybody to the letter, which is, there's a link for it in the chat box, and it will answer all of your questions. So please take a look at that. And then as always, feel free to reach out to any of us with any further clarifications or questions or suggestions, because this letter has been, as I said, I've submitted it to the Biden transition. I've submitted it to the agency review teams for Treasury and HUD, as well as the career staff at Treasury and HUD. And this morning, I participated in the first of a series of stakeholder calls that the two agency review teams are holding jointly this week to get feedback. So I was able to share the input that all of you have shared with us. And I'm not sure what the timing is. You know, again, we're in a time where the agency review teams are really wrapping up their work. And that administration, you know, the current administration is still there and maybe working on some guidance already. So it's a little bit unclear what will happen next or when. But there are many people who are at the agencies now who will still be at the agencies in the next administration, the career staff who are already working on this. And certainly the Biden transition team is putting a lot of focus on making sure that they get this right. So we'll share with everybody more details on what's next when we have it. But please do continue sharing with us your ideas and your feedback, and we'll continue to relay them to the transition teams. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to our next agenda item, which is to talk about best practices for emergency rental assistance programs. As many of you know and have heard us talk about many times on this call, we have been tracking emergency rental assistance programs that have already been created during COVID-19, mostly with funds from the CARES Act. And at last count, we were up to about 550 emergency rental assistance programs that we are tracking. And so we have learned a lot of lessons from these programs that already exist that can help inform how programs use the coming $25 billion. So Rebecca Yang and Kim Johnson from the NLIHC team are on the line to talk about some of those best practices that we and they have pulled out through this work that we've been doing that can help inform program administrators as they start to put together their programs and plans for the $25 billion. And I will say that the best practices that they're going to share are in a paper that we are publishing any moment. Oh, good, Rebecca just put the link up. So it's live now. And we'll push it out as well in follow-up emails for the link to the paper, but I urge you all to take a look at it. And Rebecca and Kim, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Diane. And hi, everybody. This is Kim Johnson. I'm a policy analyst at the Coalition. And Rebecca and I are going to provide an overview of some of the kind of overarching points of this best practices document. So in light of the $25 billion for emergency rental assistance that was recently enacted, Rebecca and I, along with some of our colleagues here at NLIHC, have put together guidance for state and local advocates interested in establishing their own emergency rental assistance programs. This guidance has been informed by the excellent work our research team has been conducting on emergency rental assistance programs established using CARES Act funding, as well as the insights shared by state and local advocates during our state and local implementation working group calls, which are hosted every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, just to put in a plug if anybody would like to join us. So before we start covering what's in the document, just so everybody knows, we consider this to be very much a living document. We will be updating it as Treasury releases guidance to ensure that it reflects the parameters set by Treasury, and as state and local advocates continue finding best practices for emergency rental assistance program implementation. So the document outlines key considerations and answers frequently asked questions for states and local jurisdictions as they plan to distribute that $25 billion in emergency rental assistance funding. We also pull examples from existing programs and link to documents where applicable, so advocates can look at what other state and local partners are doing. So we begin the document by determining eligibility for emergency rental assistance. And if we could get the next slide, that would be great. So the recently enacted relief bill, thank you, specifies that eligible households have at least one member who has experienced a reduction in household income, incurred significant cost, or experienced financial hardship directly or indirectly related to the pandemic. 2, that the household can demonstrate a risk of housing instability or homelessness. And 3, that the household's income is below 80% of area median income. The relief package itself provides states and jurisdictions with flexibility in what evidence is required to prove housing instability. And unless specific guidance is provided by Treasury, we recommend programs use as broad a definition of housing instability as possible to avoid creating a narrow window of eligibility that can preclude renters from qualifying. This may include self-certification of current housing cost burden, living doubled up or tripled up with another household, accumulating back rent, or currently experiencing homelessness. Program administrators should not require an eviction notice as proof of eligibility, since an eviction notice is often too late to prevent the negative consequences for a tenant. The relief package does not place restrictions on eligibility based on immigration status, and program administrators should include flexibility for residents of federally assisted housing to access emergency rental assistance as needed. Assisted households experiencing a drop in income can request an income recertification, but may still accrue back rent while their recertification is processed. Emergency rental assistance applications should be as short as possible and as simple as possible, requiring basic eligibility information like current household income, rental costs, and COVID-related hardship. These short initial applications can help administrators determine whether an applicant meets basic eligibility requirements and whether additional documentation is necessary. Our research indicates that long applications or requiring excessive documentation can actually deter tenants from completing their application and increase administrative burden for program staff. Programs funded through the COVID-19 relief package are required to give preference to households with incomes at or below 50% of area median income, or with unemployed members at the time of application, and administrators can set other priorities as well. A significant share of emergency rental funding should be targeted to households with the lowest incomes, those earning less than 30% of area median income. These renters typically have the fewest financial supports to fall back on and are most at risk of eviction and homelessness. Program administrators can also target emergency rental assistance to areas with high shares of housing instability, job loss, and populations disproportionately economically impacted by the pandemic, including communities of color, which have been hardest hit by the pandemic. We also recommend using a weighted lottery system when it comes to distributing funds, rather than a typical lottery system or a first-come, first-served model of distribution. First-come, first-served model programs may inadvertently favor applicants who face fewer barriers to applying for assistance and exclude historically marginalized populations who may not have immediate access to an application because of things like limited internet access or language barriers. A weighted lottery system with a rolling deadline for applications can ensure that populations with the greatest needs are more likely to receive assistance, but a weighted lottery system on its own cannot ensure marginalized populations have access to assistance. Outreach, intake assistance, and other assets must also be provided to marginalized communities. And with that, I'll hand it over to Rebecca to talk more about the guidance.
Thanks, Kim. Okay, so now we're at the fourth major section, what emergency rental assistance covers. The COVID-19 relief package allows programs to cover up to 12 months of rent and an additional 3 months as needed to ensure housing stability. So 15 months in total. Programs can cover future rent only if they also provide assistance to reduce an eligible tenant's rental arrears. Because the need for assistance is greater than current resources, program administrators will need to decide what share of rent and how many months emergency rental assistance will cover. In order to stretch funding, many program administrators using CARES Act funding from 2020 chose to either cover a fraction of rent, commonly covering 80 to 90% of rent, or set a cap based on fair market rents. The guidance also discusses landlord requirements and how landlords are involved in emergency rental assistance programs. States and localities can make payments directly to landlords or utility companies on behalf of renters. If a landlord refuses to accept rental assistance, the program can provide assistance directly to the renter, who can then make payments to the landlord or utility provider. We recommend that program administrators provide a short amount of time, such as up to 7 calendar days, for landlords to participate and meet necessary requirements before distributing assistance directly to tenants to ensure efficiency of their programs. Most programs require landlords to submit a W-9 form in order to process payments. Some programs also have some additional requirements of landlords in an effort to stretch the limited supply of rental assistance available. And some of these programs may include housing quality inspections, asking landlords to not evict tenants for a certain period of time, waiving late fees, etc. I think that one thing I'm wary of is overly stringent concessions can reduce landlords' willingness to participate. So program administrators will need to be judicious and have to work with landlords to figure out where that line is. It's really critical that programs work with organizations embedded in communities hardest hit by housing instability and COVID, especially organizations serving communities of color and other organizations with experiences in providing aid and support to people in need, like community action agencies, United Way, and 211. All of these organizations can really bolster outreach efforts. They're already embedded in the community and hold the community's trust, and can help also with intake efforts. The guidance also briefly covers what other federal funding streams there are to support rental assistance. So the CARES Act provided several funding streams that have different flexibilities and requirements that, blended with this recent relief package, could help bolster emergency rental assistance programs. And then, as Diane and Sarah discussed already, NLHC put together a letter encouraging Treasury to quickly provide much needed guidance so that state and local governments can effectively and efficiently distribute aid to renters most in need of assistance. So I hope that you've been able to check that letter out. And for the sake of time, I think I'll stop here. But please do check out the guidance. Just a reminder that this is a living document, so we'll be updating it as we get more information. And if you have any other questions you think we should cover, please do feel free to reach out to us.
Great, Rebecca and Kim, thanks very much for that overview, and thanks for your work on this document. I think it's going to be very helpful to many people across the country, program administrators, as you start to put together your programs and ideas for how to use the $25 billion in emergency rental assistance, and advocates and organizers and impacted people to use to advocate at the local level to ensure that program administrators at the state and local level meet the needs of the lowest income renters. So please take a look at the report. Let us know what you think. Let us know your ideas and recommendations because there's much more to come on this. So thanks for that, Kim and Rebecca. I'm going to turn now to our next agenda item, which is to hear from Rachel Cohen-Miller from Disability Rights Texas to share information about an accommodation request letter generator for people with disabilities who are facing eviction. So Rachel, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So I want to take a couple seconds. I know the title, there's lots there, and it talks about people with disabilities. And I want to take a couple seconds to talk about what that means, people with disabilities. How many people will this really help? Disability in this sense is broader than most people realize. And so the tool is going to cover more people than you would think looking at it, right? So in this situation, let's say somebody's behind on rent, there's concern they're going to be evicted. Let's say they've already gotten a notice, or even another step has been, taken, right? The eviction's been filed. In in this context, right, in this situation, what is disability? What does that mean? So here you're looking at people that have underlying conditions that put them at risk of serious outcomes if they get COVID, right? So the CDC has talked about a number of things, diabetes, all kinds of things that if you get COVID, you're at risk of serious outcomes. And so that's something to think about if you're facing eviction, and that you fit in that category. If you have COVID and can't take care of yourself, you fit in this category. Or if you've had COVID and you couldn't work because of this, right? Also, mental illness is something that we're looking at. Let's say that you're dealing with, you've been laid off, and it's making, it's affecting your daily life activities. You're not sleeping, and you're not able to function anymore. It's affecting your ability to take care of yourself, right? Like, let's say the dishes are yeah, they're in the sink and nothing's getting done. You're not eating the way you should be. You're not showering, brushing your teeth, things like that. And I think that this tool is only going to get more important as time goes on, particularly given what we know about the COVID strain, the strains that are here and how transmissible they are. So I want to go through what this does and how it works next. So if you're not on our website, certainly you can go there and click on the tool and look at it. But what does it do? Well, it lets you ask for an accommodation or a change to a policy. And what we've been seeing trend-wise is that people need to work out a payment plan with their landlord. The landlord says, nope, no payment plan, you got to go. Well, if you've got a disability and it's related to why you're not working, some of the situations we've already talked about, you can ask for a change to their policies. So let me work out a payment plan. Forgive past due rent. I've got some people on our housing, transportation, and disaster team that have gotten past due rent forgiven, 5 figures worth of past due rent, or forgive fees and fines. We've also been able to do that. And so this generator lets you ask that from your landlord. Generally the situations that we're looking at, right? So you're behind on rent. Well, why? What does this apply to? Let's say you got COVID and you couldn't work. We've gotten a ton of these calls where somebody gets COVID, they couldn't work, and so now they're behind, right? They were in the hospital for a couple of weeks, or they were isolated. Or let's say you're a parent and kiddo gets it, or somebody you're taking care of gets it and you're not able to work. Let's say you have to stop working because somebody that you know is at risk of a serious outcome if they get COVID. How many teachers have we heard of, right? Or people that are on the front lines that can't work where they normally work because either they're at high risk and could have these complications, or somebody in their household is. Or if you've been exposed to COVID and you have to quarantine. And so these are the reasons you may, let's say you're behind on rent for any of these reasons. And these are not the only reasons, these are just what we've been seeing the most of. And when I say this, that's the reason they're behind on rent, right? And so they couldn't work because of, got COVID, that kind of thing. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is when losing your income, right? So either you're not able to work or you're cut back on hours, and it increases symptoms of anxiety or depression, right? Let's say you've already got it and you're taking medication and it's controlled, right? You're somebody like me. But now you've lost your income and it is spiraling out of control. And so even though you don't have COVID right then, the manifestations, your disabilities are getting worse because you're worried that you're going to be homeless. And so you can use this tool and say, okay, please give me more time. I'm looking for a job. Give me more time to pay my rent. Let me pay it out over a certain number of months. And the big reason we think this particular tool, and by we, I mean the team that I work with, the team of attorneys and advocates and policy people. And so, it's very, it's something that we're continuing to see rather. I do want to touch on one, not want to touch, I want to talk about one other thing before I end. And that's another consideration, talk about minority populations. Senator Brown addressed this earlier, and I think, Diane did, I think everybody's talked about this on this call. And we've got, I want to take a second to recognize the impact last week had on minority populations, on people, populations of people of color, who are already facing anxiety and stress and PTSD based on life experiences, where they live and who they've interacted with, things like that. Those populations, people are especially vulnerable right now because of the violence that we saw perpetrated last week and the ongoing systemic and institutionalized discrimination that is everywhere, particularly in housing. Facing housing instability and homelessness right now and knowing that you're not going to be able to protect your family, given what happened last week and what we know is an ongoing concern in terms of violence across the country. If you're a person of color, family of color, and you don't think you're going to be able to protect your family, that's an additional stress that adds to the anxiety, the depression, the PTSD that you're already dealing with because of where you grew up, because of how you grew up. And I think that, that is, that also gives rise to an accommodation, right? If somebody lost their job, and this is, an added stress that they're facing. And so this is one other reason that you could potentially use the generator that we have used, or that we have put out there. And I appreciate everybody taking some time to listen to us right now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rachel. Thanks for your work on this. It's a really important tool that you've created, and a really important service that you're providing. There's multiple people in the chat box who are similarly thanking you for your work, thanking you for being so open about depression and helping to address the stigma around mental health, and thanking you for your innovative work. So I hope you'll take a look at some of those notes to you. But there also is a question asking, well, it's a multi-question. It says, is there an example of what the accommodation letter looks like after filling out the online form? Also, do you have any experience with forgiveness of any money owed? I've not found any case law or guidance that supports that as a reasonable accommodation, yet I can see the reasoning in the letter. And that comes from Wesley Speary.
In terms of case law, I don't have any at my fingertips. I would generally defer. We've got a senior litigation attorney that I am lucky enough to work with, that I would defer to him on that particular piece. But we have gotten that done. One of the attorneys that I work with, Afnan Akram, is, and I'm not gonna tell you, how amazing she is, but we have had rent forgiven to the tune of almost $13,000. So, we have had that happen in the work that we've been doing. We've also had landlords give tenants money to move in addition to forgiving rent. So we've also seen that. I don't know about the case law off the top of my head, but certainly that is there. And the other piece of this is there is always, for landlords to consider, right? You're not always going to get what you ask for, particularly because you have to take into consideration the situation of the landlord, right? Is this going to be some kind of undue financial burden to them? But you don't get what you don't ask for. And in times like this, where we're looking at 30 to 40 million people that are on the brink of homelessness, with a raging pandemic that is killing people around the country, particularly, that we know is only going to get worse. We think it's important to at least ask, and to at least assert rights that we think are there. Even if there's not case law, it doesn't mean that the rights shouldn't exist.
Right, thank you, Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
Another question is whether residents in other states can use the letter generator?
Yes, feel free to. We have had people across the country use the generator. If you use it and it doesn't get you the result that you want, I'm with the Protection and Advocacy Organization for the state of Texas, Disability Rights Texas. There is one of us in every state. There's also a legal aid. There's also legal aids all around the country. And you can reach out to you can reach out to us and we can see if we can refer you to somebody if it doesn't work, or you can reach out to your local legal aid. And they should be able to help as well.
Great, thank you, Rachel. There's some other comments in the chat and the Q&A box that if you have a chance to take a look at and address, I think that would be helpful. And if not, we'll find a way to get your answers out to everybody on this call. But I really appreciate your work on this and thank you for sharing this important tool with our network.
Without a doubt. I will, one more thing, and I appreciate the note. There's also fair housing organizations across the country, actually, that's where I was taught to do this work, that are a network of fair housing organizations across the country. If you have questions on, one in your local area, you can also reach out to NAFA, and they should have a list for you.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. Okay, I'm going to turn now to field updates, and I'm going to start with Rachel Heller. She's the CEO of Citizens Housing and Planning Association, or CHAPA, in Massachusetts. Rachel, thanks so much for joining. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me, and really thank you to all of the speakers who have spoken today. It's incredibly informative as always. My name is Rachel Heller, as Diane said. I'm the CEO of CHAPA, Citizens Housing and Planning Association. We're a statewide nonprofit organization in Massachusetts that brings a broad set of stakeholders together to encourage the production and preservation of homes that are affordable to households with low and moderate incomes and to foster diverse and sustainable communities. Oops, I'm trying to forward the slides, but I can't quite figure out how. Can someone advance to the next slide? Is that possible? Oh, thank you. There, perfect. So we do our work by advocating for opportunity at the local, state, and federal levels and expanding access to housing through public policy changes and through programs we administer. We also work to develop the affordable housing and community development field. Since the start of the pandemic, CHAPA has been bringing stakeholders together to understand how the pandemic is impacting people across incomes, races, communities, and regions of our state. And early on, we supported the work of a lot of our partners to establish a statewide moratorium. And when the policy was challenged in court, we submitted an amicus brief in its defense. Throughout the pandemic and the moratorium, we worked with our partners across the state to advocate for resources to help people pay their rent with the goals of helping people stay stable through this incredibly challenging time, help our properties to stay stable and healthy, and help our neighborhoods stay stable. We've advocated that helping people pay the rent helps advance all of these areas. When people can pay their rent, they're more stable and better able to survive the pandemic. When people pay their rent, property owners can pay their mortgages and property taxes. And when people can pay their rent and owners can pay their bills, our communities can remain stable and hopefully prevent investors and banks from purchasing properties in distress. We also know that helping tenants to pay their rent helps to preserve our affordable housing stock. So we and our incredible partners have successfully advocated for increases to our state's homelessness prevention program, RAFT. And we've worked together to keep advocating for changes to make this program work better for the people who need it. Please go to the next slide. So the efforts of our joint advocacy have been evident in funds that were allocated through the legislature and also through the announcement of Governor Baker's eviction diversion initiative. The eviction diversion initiative was announced as our state's eviction moratorium was coming to an end in October. It provides $100 million for our state's RAFT program, the Emergency Rental Assistance. And in that program, it allows for households to access up to $10,000 in relief. The program also allocates almost $50 million for homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing, $12 million for a right to counsel program, to provide legal representation to tenants in eviction proceedings, $6.5 million to our housing consumer education centers. This is really the front door for people facing housing emergencies, and almost $4 million for case management through the state's tenancy preservation program that acts as a neutral party and helps tenants and landlords come to agreements. After the governor announced this initiative, we worked again with our partners to launch the Eviction Diversion Initiative Pledge. This was a commitment of property owners to work with tenants, help them access resources, develop payment plans when possible. And to date, 67 property owners have signed, covering 140,895 homes. This includes a range of small property owners, large property owners, and public housing. Please go to the next slide. That wasn't all. We're working through every vehicle possible to keep advancing resources and protections. So as our state budget process was going on, several important policies were put into place through the budget, which was just signed at the end of December. And this was led by many of the partners that we work with. The new language that was established in the budget provides certain eviction protections to help tenants better navigate the complexities of eviction proceedings and helps increase the awareness of the programs that are out there to help. It requires owners to provide notices both to the renters and to the state when there's a notice to quit. So they need to include information that documents whether or not the renter has provided a declaration invoking the protection under the CDC moratorium. If there's any repayment plan agreement. The new law also grants continuance or stay of execution for eviction cases if there is an application for state rental assistance. The law also strengthens the governor's initiative by requiring monthly reporting and also creating a task force to track outcomes of the initiative and make recommendations for improving the implementation. And that should all happen by the end of this month. Next slide, please. And last week, a significant action was taken by the Massachusetts legislature to increase housing production and affordable housing production. This economic development bill, which the governor has until the end of this week to sign, includes policies that help to open up communities that have been out of reach for so many and that have perpetuated our high housing costs and segregation. And the bill also includes tools to help people stay in the communities that they've called home. So these are just a few of the provisions that are in there. It's really a very impressive amount of policies that were included. First, it reduces the voting threshold from a supermajority to a simple majority for municipalities that are trying to approve smart growth zoning and affordable housing near transit. This voting threshold has been one of our greatest barriers in our communities to getting the affordable housing and to getting the housing built that we need, to getting that zoning. The bill also includes a requirement for communities in Greater Boston who are served by the subway, the commuter rail, ferries, and buses to zone for the multifamily housing that we need. The bill also includes eviction record sealing. So it seals no-fault evictions and also prohibits minors from being named in a summary process. The bill provides $10 million in funding for sustainable and climate resilient affordable housing, as well as $50 million for funding affordable housing near public transportation. The bill includes a local option for tenant right to purchase and help people buy properties that are being sold. And it makes changes to our state program that we have to create housing in our gateway cities, ensuring that there's affordable housing that's being built as a part of any of the housing developed there through this program. So we're really hopeful and working really hard to make sure that the governor signs all of these provisions into law this week. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them.
Such great work, Rachel, and a great overview of it. Thank you for that. There's a couple of questions. One, several people asking if we'll share your slide deck, and the answer is yes, we will. As follow-up to this call, we'll share all the materials that were mentioned on this call. There's a question, Rachel, about whether you can share a link to the landlord co-op agreement.
Yes, and I'll call on my wonderful colleague, Ryan, who I know is on the call. If you can post that right now, otherwise I'll look it up in a second and put it there.
Great. And then also a question on if you can tell us more about the state's 2018 $1.8 billion bond initiative and whether that model is being pursued elsewhere, and if you have a synopsis of the program that you can share.
Oh, the $1.8 billion housing bond bill. Yes, that so that's a 5-year authorization of our affordable housing programs that we are partially through that authorization. So we will be working again on our next bond bill in the next, not this legislative session, but in the one that follows after this. And it's really that is the backbone of our affordable housing development in Massachusetts. And that actually triggers one of the other really important provisions in our economic development bill last week, is the doubling of our state low-income housing tax credit. So that would be a really big deal to get both the 20 million that was already awarded in our bond bill a couple of years ago, adding $20 million through our state's economic development bill. We could provide, I believe I could provide a link in the chat that outlines the programs in that bond bill.
Great. Yeah, that would be helpful. And I see that Ryan did put a link for the eviction diversion pledge in the chat box. So great. Rachel, again, thank you for your leadership and your great work. And thanks for sharing it on today's call.
Thank you.
All right, and I'll turn now to our next field update, which comes from New Jersey, from Stacy Berger, President and CEO of the Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey. Hi, Stacy, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, Diane. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks to everyone on your tremendous staff for the enormously difficult and hard work all of you have been doing since forever, but especially since March. Here in New Jersey, we really appreciate it. The Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey is proudly the state partner here in the Garden State for NLIHC. We take our cues from all of you and really wouldn't be able to do anything well without all of you doing tremendously difficult, hard work at the federal level. So we are enormously grateful. I do not have slides like Rachel, although I wish I did. So no one has to ask me for my slide deck, but we can certainly provide notes or backup information if anyone has follow-up questions. The network here in New Jersey is very similar to CHAPA. We are the statewide association of about 150 nonprofit community development corporations, housing advocates, and about another 100 or so private sector investors and supporters of affordable homes. And so we represent quite a wide array of community development organizations who are engaged in both rental development, home ownership, and housing counseling, and have been working to protect the lowest income tenants and homeowners, as well as people experiencing homelessness here in the Garden State after the pandemic. So I did just want to say two quick things. I wanted to thank Rachel Heller for covering a lot of the same issues that we've taken on. It's great to have somebody from my home state of Massachusetts be doing such incredible work. It's really an honor to hear about what they're doing. And also to thank Rachel Cohen-Miller for her remarks, especially regarding the impact that the assault on the Capitol building had last week. In the news today that our own New Jersey's own Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman, who many of you are familiar with, is a champion of housing justice and racial equity, was infected with the COVID-19 virus, she believes, during the lockdown. So we are all sending our strongest good wishes to the Congresswoman because she is really a tremendous advocate in the halls of Congress for all of us. So here in New Jersey, we've been doing quite a few things to try to keep people safe and stably housed. First, we succeeded in getting a moratorium on removals as a result of evictions or foreclosures. That moratorium does not have an end date. It is tied to whenever Governor Murphy determines that the public health emergency is over. So unlike the federal CDC eviction moratorium, this is really a removal moratorium. Evictions can continue to be filed as foreclosure actions, but no one can be removed from their home as a result of those actions, even if they're completed for at least 60 days after the end of the public health emergency. So we have bought some folks some time, and we are continuing to do that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So that is good for both evictions as a result of tenant court, as well as foreclosures. We have adopted a forbearance program, a voluntary forbearance program that the Department of Banking and Insurance here has stood up. So homeowners experiencing a loss of income or other reasons why they couldn't pay their mortgage can negotiate an agreement with their lender if they are voluntarily doing that on the lender side. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. There's also a utility shutoff moratorium on both power, cable, and water, so that folks are able to continue to keep those day-to-day utilities going without difficulty or fear of losing them, especially as we have almost at least half, if not more, of our schools are remote. Having internet access is quickly, obviously becoming a utility need, not a luxury. We also were able to get the governor to allow tenants to use their security deposit as rent. So anyone who wanted to have their landlord apply that money to their either their back rent or going forward, they were allowed to do that, although landlords have sued and are trying to get that overturned. We are fighting that. The all of the eviction proceedings that have been filed are beginning to kind of roll forward, and the mortgage foreclosures are beginning to take place as well, which is why we are fighting tooth and nail for legislation that we have lovingly called the People's Bill, which would allow folks to would require rather that landlords negotiate a payback time for their tenants. So anyone who can show that they've been impacted by COVID-19 and earn less than 100% of the area median income would have at least 30 months to pay back their rent. And if they wanted to negotiate something different with their landlord, they could, but they would have basically 30 months, every 6 months, they would have to pay back 1 month is the current structure of the bill. We've had this bill pass both houses in different forms, and we are currently working with the governor's office and with the legislature to try to get everybody on the same page. But this is essentially the model that we used after Superstorm Sandy, when we developed a program that allowed victims of Superstorm Sandy and the very inept implementation of our recovery after that disaster to buy time, because we don't know how much money we're going to get, although we are thrilled to be getting a portion of the $25 billion that is now coming down the pike. We know that is not going to be enough. NLIHC has estimated we need about $3 billion. So we are trying to buy people time if we cannot get them all the money that they need. We would like to do both, but we want to make sure that people have enough time to pay back what they owe. So that is really the main effort on our policy front. We are standing up a tenant mediation program with help from the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund, and the state's Affordable Housing Trust Fund has identified about $1 million for the network and our housing counseling members to stand up a mediation program, which sounds similar to what Rachel described, which is completely new for us. New Jersey has one of the 3 cities in America that has a right to counsel program, and that's the city of Newark, but the rest of the state is without it. So this is all kind of stuff we're trying to get out the door at the same time that people desperately need it. We believe that we have a little bit of time because we don't think that the governor is going to turn that public health emergency off anytime soon, but we definitely want to make sure that those programs are up and running. So things are happening sort of moment to moment here. We are one of the states that's been most deeply impacted by COVID, and we want to make sure that the 30% of our tenants, 30% of our residents rather, who are tenants, have the resources and the tools that they need to stay safely and stably housed. And I'll stop there, Diane, if there are any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. Really great work and leadership. So many best practices for other communities to work to replicate. So thank you for your work and for sharing it. There's a question on the security deposit solution. For the question from Jacqueline Wu is, for the security deposit use as rent in New Jersey, do tenants have to purchase security deposit alternatives instead?
No, they do not. They do have to repay it at a certain point, date to be determined. I want to say that it's 180 days after the end of the public health emergency, but I don't have that date off the top of my head. But we can get, I can get copies of the executive order.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can. Sure, we can share that out. And then a question about whether you can share a link to the bill that's being negotiated.
I can absolutely share a link to any version of the bill that's been negotiated.
Right.
This bill has been in process since March 20th. And so there are multiple versions, but I will share the most recent, which has amendments from the Senate. So like the federal process, both houses bicameral legislation, they have to agree and they don't. And one of the sticking pieces is a tax credit for small home owner occupied units. So which we're obviously all very concerned about because those folks are much more at risk than the large for-profit landlords, at least in New Jersey's communities.
Right.
So I'll share a link to the bill and the amendments and also to the executive order.
Great.
Security deposits.
Great. Thank you, Stacy. Thanks so much for your great
Thanks
work.
for having me.
Okay, take care. All right, so that is all of our speakers for today's call. I do want to note for some next steps that, as always, this week we'll be having a number of calls for working groups of this larger Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition, and you are all welcome to join any or all. Tuesday at 12:30 to 1:30 Eastern Time is our policy working group, where we'll continue talking about putting together our policy priorities for the next COVID relief package. On Tuesday at 3 p.m., we have our Working with FEMA working group, where we'll continue working on and talking about challenges with non-congregate sheltering for people experiencing homelessness. And on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern, we have our state and local implementation calls, where we'll continue talking about best practices for emergency rental assistance programs, updates from Treasury, and advocacy that we will do collectively to get these funds out quickly and efficiently and effectively. So you're all welcome to join any or all of those calls. We are expecting that later this week, President-elect Biden will announce some details of what he wants to see in the next COVID relief package. He may announce that as soon as Thursday, and we're expecting that he will include in that a request for an additional $1,400 in stimulus checks to add to the $600 that was enacted in the last COVID package, for a total of $2,000 stimulus checks. We expect that he will be asking for state and local aid and money for vaccine distribution. And he may and will certainly be urging that he does, either before or after the package comes out, includes additional funding for rental assistance. So we'll keep you all posted on what we learn about that package, either before or when it's introduced or announced. And then on next Monday's call, we'll talk in much more depth about the set of policy priorities that we will want to collectively advocate for in the next COVID relief package. And again, would love your input on that. We got a lot of great input last week during the policy working group call. We'll have a similar conversation again tomorrow, where more input is welcomed. So thank you all again. Thanks for your great work and advocacy. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will talk to you all again soon. Thanks. Bye.